Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome back to 75 South Gardening. In today's video, I'll be showing you guys step by step how you can grow cabbage in your garden from these tiny seeds into beautiful heads of cabbage like the ones you see here. The first step to growing cabbage is simply doing your research to see which varieties grow best in the zone that you stay in. Now, not all of us stay in the same zone, and everyone doesn't have the same type of weather, so do your research first, because some varieties take cold weather better than others. Once you've done your research and chose which varieties you want to grow, now you have to ask yourself, what are you going to grow it in? Now, for those of you that have limited space, you want to go with a compact variety such as the early golden acre. Now that you know what you're going to grow your cabbage in, it's time to germinate your seeds. Now there are two methods that I use to germinate my seeds. The first method is simply direct sowing them into a seed starting mix like you see here. Now when I'm growing brassicas, I only like to use peat moss and vermiculite. I usually put perlite in my seed starting mix, but brassicas feed so heavy, when you add perlite, they seem to dry out too fast. And if you don't have time to look at them every day, you may end up with a bunch of dead seedlings. So to keep it moist longer, use the peat moss and the vermiculite. Now the second way that I like to germinate my seeds is the soaking method, by simply using a cup. And you want to put this somewhere in the cabinet where it's cool. And these were started on the 24th. Today is the 29th. And as you can see, most of them have sprouted, and a few of them also have leaves. Now this method is going to allow you to space them out so that you won't have to do much thinning later on. So what I'm going to do now is show you how I like to plant them once they've sprouted. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and get your seeds out of the cup by pouring them into the strainer. So what I like to do is spin them around like this. That way they all come out at the same time. As you can see, most of them have sprouted and already have leaves. Now what I'm going to do here is plant 6 per cell. And whatever's left, I'll probably put them in here or in another 6-cell container. And to do that, what I've already done was simply break up the seed starting mix like that. Now this was pre-soaked and it's not all the way wet, as you can see, but it's good enough for me to go ahead and plant my new seeds. So what I'm going to do is plant 6 per cell and sit this somewhere near the windowsill, and once they come up for at least 2 days, I'll put them under the grow light. And to do that, you want to put them into a napkin. You also want that napkin to be damped. You don't want these to dry out. And it's pretty simple. I don't like to dig holes. I just lay them down into the soil like that. Now that I have them in place, I'm just going to take my marker and cover them up like this. Now over here, I'll be direct sowing some round Dutch cabbage. Trying to drop one at least every ½ inch to an inch, because all of them may not sprout. If they do, I'll just have a lot of cabbage growing. So I decided to let these grow just a little bit longer before I thinned them out. And I also left them outside, so now they are fully hardened off and ready for the winter season. So what I'll be doing today is thinning out my round Dutch cabbage. Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you've probably seen this method already. This is a simple method that I like to use to thin out my seedlings without cutting them or breaking them. And this will also work if you're using a larger container. You just want to make sure that you dig down deep enough so that you don't disturb the roots. So what I'm going to do is simply push up at the bottom of my tray and remove my cabbage just like that. As you can see, those are the roots. Now that I have that done, I'm going to move this out of the way and put my plate here. And from here, what you want to do is pour water in. So I'm going to let this soak for about 20 minutes. Then I'll cut you guys back on. Alright, so it's been about 20 minutes and these are now ready to thin out. And the way I like to do it is to just simply work them apart. Just like that. Now if it doesn't pull right apart without breaking the roots, just shake it in the water like this until some of the soil comes off. Just like that. That should loosen them up a bit. They'll pull right apart without breaking. These are a bit tangled, so you want to be careful while pulling them apart so that you don't break the seedling. And just like that, I have these two thinned. So it's been about 2 weeks since I've thinned my seedlings, and they are now ready for transplanting. So what I'm going to do is let these soak for about 20 minutes so that I can separate them. And while they're soaking, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how I prep and amend my soil for my brassicas. This year I'll be planting my red acre cabbage right here in my 9-foot raised bed where I've been growing bell peppers all season. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and remove the rest of the bell peppers. Then I'll break up the soil and show you how I like to amend it with my azomite, blood meal, and chicken manure. Now that I have my soil broken up, I can go ahead and add a little organic matter to the bottom of this bed. And what I'll be using is my old pepper plants. I'm just going to toss them in there and spread them out like that. So what I'm going to do now is add those all the way across this bed. Then I'll cover them up and we'll talk a little bit about the azomite, blood meal, and chicken manure. The first thing I'll be adding to my raised bed is my blood meal. Blood meal is a source of nitrogen. Cabbage plants are very heavy feeders and they require lots of nitrogen to promote a more rapid leafy growth, just like your collard greens and your broccoli, and also your kale. So what I'll be doing is adding about 3 cups of this blood meal, and if you take a look at the back of the bag, it tells you to use 1 cup per 10 square feet. And this is a little bit over 20 square feet, so I'll be using 3 cups. Alright, so what I'll be doing today is transplanting my round Dutch cabbage. And right here I have 7 new transplants. Now these aren't the same ones from the beginning of the video. Those were all damaged by last year's frost. So before I transplant those and get into spacing, I'll go ahead and amend this with fresh compost from my yard. Now that I have my bed amended with fresh compost, I can go ahead and transplant my new cabbage transplants. Now when growing cabbage, you want to pay very close attention to the variety that you're growing. Some varieties grow well with 12 to 18 inches of space in between each plant, and some may require up to 3 feet in between each plant. Now this particular raised bed is 3 feet wide, so what I'll be doing is spacing my rows 15 inches apart. I'll also be adding 15 inches in between each plant. And down the center here, I'll be growing bunching onions. Alright, today is day 42. And your plant should look something like this, or maybe even larger, around 42 days, depending on what zone you stay in and the weather. Now, as you can see, none of the bunching onions that I planted survived the frost. So what I'll be doing today is adding sweet onions. Now I also have another bed over here, and these are at about 19 days now. And the reason I added the row covers is because I found a few of those green caterpillars that were eating on my plants. So I'm going to go ahead and add my onions. Then I'll take you guys to the other side and show you what they look like around 60 days. Alright, so this is the corner garden, and these are the round Dutch cabbages that I have at 60 days. Now even though they look a little small, that's only because of the weather. Here in Zone 8A in Georgia, we have some of the most bipolar weather that you can ever experience. All last week we were in the 30s. This week we're in the mid 40s. And it could be in the 60s next week out of nowhere, and then it might drop back down to 20s. You never know in Georgia. But as you can see, the heads are now starting to form on each plant, and soon we might be harvesting cabbage if the weather doesn't get in the low teens. So in 2 weeks I'll give you all an update on these, and then we'll talk a little more about fertilizing and pest control. Today is day 67, and the heads are just now starting to form. Now these plants are pretty much growing in slow motion right now because of the weather. So whenever your temperatures drop, you will notice that your brassicas will grow way slower. And as soon as the temps ease up, they'll take off again. So what I'll be doing today is fertilizing my cabbage plants. And I'll show you how I like to do that step by step. So the first thing I'll be doing before fertilizing my cabbage is removing my shredded leaf mulch and adding fresh compost. And for those of you growing in ground, you can go ahead and add fresh compost to your mounds to feed your plants throughout the rest of its life cycle. So what we have here is 7 gallons of rainwater, and what I'll be using today is fish fertilizer. Now with this, it isn't that strong, so what I like to do is triple the strength. So instead of 2 teaspoons per gallon, I'll be doing 6. And since this is 7 gallons, I'll be using about 42. So what I'm going to need is 2.5 cups of fish fertilizer. And just to make it even, I'm going to add 3 cups. Now you also want to make sure that you shake this well before pouring it. You can also use this on your indoor plants. I'm going to warn you that it stinks. So that's 1 cup. I'm going to mix it into this 5-gallon bucket. And then from there, I'll pour it into the bigger container, stir it up more, and then pour it into my spout. So you want to stir this up really good. I'll probably be stirring this up for 5 to 10 minutes. So what you want to do is just pour it towards the base of the plant. Don't worry about the leaves. If you can avoid them, avoid them. But you want to pour it towards the base of the plant. That way it goes directly to the roots. Now for those of you that are growing in ground, you can also go ahead and add fresh compost. This will help feed your plants, especially when growing brassicas. So the best way to fertilize brassicas is to add fresh compost. Now in this raised bed, since they're almost done, I won't be adding any today. One down, 1 to go. Alright y'all, so this is a 2-week update. Today is the 4th day of spring. It is also hot here in zone 8A. Within the last 2 weeks, the temps have been from 75 to 80 degrees. And whenever it's that hot and you're growing cabbage, they won't form a head. 9 times out of 10, they're going to end up bolting like the one you see over here. If you look closely, these are seed pods in the center. And if you let this continue to grow, the leaves will become bitter and it will form seeds, just like the broccoli plant here. So what I'll be doing today is harvesting the ones that are ready. Now over here, these are all round Dutch cabbages. Now when it comes to harvesting cabbage, there's 2 things that I look for. The first way to tell if your cabbage is ready to harvest is to simply take your hand and squeeze the head. You want to look for a nice firm head when harvesting your cabbage. If it's like the one you see here, and you can squeeze it in like that, it's not ready. So remember, once it's firm like this and the last leaf flips over like the ones you see here, it's pretty much done and it's not going to grow any bigger. So since I have this one open, I'll start over here. Now for those of you that are new to growing cabbage, there's another way to tell if your plants are bolting. If you notice, all of these plants are short and bushy, but the one you see here and here have a little stretch to them. Cabbages should grow low to the ground like the ones you see with the heads on them. The tall ones like that are more likely to bolt and form flowers in the center, which will end up being seeds if you let it continue to grow. Now that you know how to tell if your plant is bolting, let's talk a little bit about the 2 ways that you can harvest your cabbage plant. The first way is pretty much common sense. You can remove the whole plant, break the head off, and cook it. You can also cook these leaves. Now the second way is to simply grab the head, twist it off, just like that, and leave the plant in the ground. So now what I'm going to do is remove all of the bolted plants. I found another one here in the back, y'all. I'm going to remove that one. I'll also be removing these 2. and the one that bolted here. Now the ones along the back, I'll give them a few more days or maybe a week just to see if they form a head. If not, they will be removed because this bed will be used for my collard greens this year. Now over here I'll be removing all of the plants except for the one you see here that isn't done, this one, and the one in the back right there. I might keep that one for seeds. Now that is the one that the bugs got to when I first transplanted, but it grew back. So I might keep it until it bolts, put it in a different container, and save the seeds for the fall. Alright you guys, so it's been about 2 weeks since I shot the last clip, and the round Dutch cabbage here that started to stretch is actually starting to form a head. So I'm going to let that one stay, but the ones that have bolted, like the one here, I'll be removing. So all of these, except for 4 or 5 of them, have bolted. So I'm going to start right here. Now I will be going back with collards. So what I'm going to do is simply cut at the base and leave the roots in the ground. Now you always want to leave your roots in the ground, so make sure you're cutting it at the base. And what this does is feeds the soil. And what I mean by that is your worms, your bacteria, the fungi that lives in your soil, and the microorganisms will all nibble away at the roots. And over time, it will break them down and convert it back into nutrients that will be available for the next plants that I transplant into this bed. Now another note is what you see here is a roly-poly. Now these can be good and bad for the soil. Now what they do is they like to feed on organic matter that is dead, like the leaves that you see here. But if the population gets out of hand, they will eat your whole plant. So always pay attention to the population of certain bugs that you see in your soil. So always remember to cut at the base, leave those roots in the ground. That way you keep all of the good microbes that your soil needs to become a healthier soil. Now for those of you that may have had disease plants, ripping them out will not remove the pathogens of your disease. The best way to fight that off is to simply add fresh compost on the top layer. So right here, this is the market early cabbage that I harvested early in the video, and you guys see me twist the head off. It has now started to form its Brussels sprout sized cabbages. So within a few weeks, I'll give you guys an update on this so you can see how they come out. So right now what I'm going to do is finish removing my bolted plants. I'll also be taking a few of these leaves here, breaking them into small pieces, and simply burying them in the soil, which will also break down and add nutrients back to the soil, just like the roots of the plants that I've already cut. Now there's one other thing that I forgot to mention. Once you cut these at the base, especially in the winter time, you will notice that the center will have a hole in it. That hole will be a nest for your beneficial insects to lay eggs and overwinter during the winter months. So there's 2 different ways you can store your cabbage. The first way is to simply put it at the bottom of your fridge in the crisper. These will store up to 3 weeks, and these have been in here for exactly 2 weeks, and as you can see, they are still fresh. So what I'll be doing today is cutting these up and demonstrating the second method, which is simply freezing them. So the first step when it comes to storing your cabbage is to simply clean your cabbage. And I like to start off with the fan leaves that you see here, and once they're clean, I chop them up and store them in freezer bags. Now there's two options before storing them in the freezer bags. One is pretty much common sense. You simply put them into the freezer bag and freeze them. Two is to blanch them in a pot before freezing. Now the difference between that is blanching will kill all of the bacteria and enzymes that help break down the leaves over time. So if you plan on storing these for up to a year, you want to make sure that you blanch them. Now I already have about 8 bags in my freezer that have been blanched. So the ones that you see here will not be blanched. They will just be stored in the bag, and we will eat these first. And I'll repeat the same steps for my cabbage heads.